Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Good to Great, Lessons for Agencies as They Reopen, sponsored by Splunk on Federal News Network. I'm Jason Miller. My guests today are Frank Demina, the Vice President for Public Sector at Splunk, and Juliana Vita, the Chief Technical Advisor for Public Sector, also at Splunk. Now, Frank, Juliana, before break, we were talking a little bit about the buildup during the COVID pandemic, the challenges, the surges agencies faced. We're talking about reopening, and several agencies have announced their plans to reopen. Several agencies have announced even employees coming back. So Frank, start us off. What should agencies keep in mind as they start to reopen, as employees and contractors start to come back?
It's a great question. It's something actually we've been spending a lot of time at Splunk thinking about and making sure that we have the right strategies to help our partners on. A couple of thoughts there. First, as we talked about, there's going to be continued acceleration of cloud migration and SaaS adoption. Just in fact, in May of last year, Bloomberg government reported that federal agencies were planning to move about 270 IT programs to the cloud. If you take that same survey in April of 2020, that number's up to over 1,800. So I think there is an acceleration and a change where people are seeing the value. Why? For all the reasons that we've already discussed. I think for the government leaders that are listening, there's going to be is a good opportunity to relook your decisions, your plans for the rest of this fiscal year, and can I accomplish that mission or solution by taking a SaaS or cloud approach? Second, I think we're going to be looking at workers in a work from home scenario for quite some time. It will likely be extended. So what type of tools do they need to continue and be functional and productive in that manner? Mobile and remote user interfaces. Those will be key requirements to support our remote workers going forward, and not assume that the folks using our tools and our solutions will be sitting in an office. But I think lastly, and the most important question is, how can I leverage data to get folks back to work safely as things start to open up? And this is not just a government challenge. This is an education. This is a challenge for education institutions and public school systems as well. And we're working with several of those organizations. And an example of that is just how can I use data that I'm already collecting to support this? Wi-Fi data is a great example. I can use my Wi-Fi data to look at where do a lot of folks tend to congregate during the day. And then based on that information, I know I can apply my cleaning resources to maybe to ensure a little extra cleaning or disinfecting of those areas where folks tend to congregate. So again, approaching this with a data-driven model lets me use my scarce or limited resources in a better, more efficient way to help folks get back to work safely.
Juliana, one of the things that we've seen, and I think Frank brought up, is this continued acceleration to cloud and software as a service. I'd be interested to see if GAO or somebody does a report eventually to tell us, you know, in fiscal 2020, the use of cloud jumped by X%. What are you hearing from agencies around cloud services, and why is, beyond the obvious reasons, why do you think there's this move that people are seeing the value today more than ever?
Well, what I think is that as we listen to, now we're starting to hear more webinars and more people come out of the woodwork, a little bit out of the initial chaos of what do we do. Leaders are starting to talk about their experience, and they're starting to share exactly how they've been successful using cloud technologies, using modern IT tools and products. And we talked earlier about a state government example, but recently in the press, the CIO of the Department of Transportation talked specifically about how they were able to shift quickly to support their remote workforce because, again, they had already made investments in modern IT tools and products, including cloud, including shared services. So I think that as they start to share their lessons, honestly, it's as simple as listening to what peer CIOs and peer agencies are doing and have done, and just replicate that. And basically take the guidance that's already out there in terms of the Cloud Smart policy and other guiding documents. And now is the time to, through a different lens of practical application, look at, oh, that's what that meant. I should go do that. I should go invest in technology. And again, back to the message of those who have invested in cloud and are using cloud are seeing improved results, and they're talking about it. So listen to them and take their lead in investing in the cloud technology that can help get through the rest of the crisis and beyond. As Frank said, we're starting to talk to them about, what do you do next? Well, what you do next is build upon what you've done now during COVID, and don't lose the momentum. We can't go back.
I think you make a great point of don't lose the momentum. I hear that time and again, not just from industry, but even within the government. And Frank, that's a great segue to bring you back into the discussion about there are agencies that definitely, and what are you hearing from your customers more specifically, that needs help, and where are the opportunities in the future?
So I think there's two ways to look at that, in a tactical way and a more strategic approach. First off, there's a lot of tools out today that can help us uh, compensate for the fact that folks are not in an office or not at their desk and may not have access to all the resources they would in an office. And we've talked about it a little bit already, and that's automation tools. There are tools for automation in cyber, and we're working with some federal partners where they're using these tools to completely automate the handling and response of what are called tier one events. Those are lower issue, less complicated cyber events that are happening. Phishing is a great example. When phishing happens at an organization, there tends to be a very repeatable, process-driven response to those phishing events and how to handle them. So by automating those events, you gain productivity by freeing up your analysts. Most folks that I know do not have enough skilled cyber analysts. So if I can free up their time so they can concentrate on higher tier events, I'm getting more from my resources, I'm keeping folks happy, I'm avoiding burnout, and I'm doing that through automation tools to be more productive. From a strategic perspective, I think there's a real opportunity here, and what we've been talking about in the past few minutes is about making data more accessible and usable by everyone. And when we look at this with another lens, something I've personally spoken about in the past is this is a chance for increasing data democracy. And what we mean by that, this is a chance for making data more open and more usable by more people, or putting data to work for the citizens of this country. I think the best way that data can be used by government right now is by enabling the frontline workers with access to data so they can make decisions in real time. And ultimately what this means for public sector, state, local, federal, is that you're taking a data-driven approach for every job function. I'm not talking about spending more money on tools. This can be just leveraging data that's already collected. And I'll end with an example, right? Most federal organizations are collecting and reporting badge data when employees badge in and out of facilities. That same data can be reused right now to help folks get back to work in terms of exposure tracking, right? If an employee self-reports that someone has been exposed to COVID, I can leverage that badge data that is used for physical security to also know what other employees were they around and at work and that may have been exposed. And that's an example of how we can gain more value from our data and expose that to government workers to be smarter, more efficient, and make better decisions.
Juliana, one of the things we hear a lot, the term new normal, and I think that's one of those terms that people maybe get a little tired of, but it's the fact of life. What do you think, as you look back over the last couple of months, what are some of those quote unquote new normal activities that will endure, that agencies can really continue to take advantage of, whether or not we get past this initial and long-term COVID challenge?
Yeah, great question, Jason. And it's one of the things that as Frank and I, as others across Splunk have been engaging with customers and helping them and keeping our ears to the ground, we've kind of focused on a couple big buckets of what we think will endure. And those are enterprise-wide remote work and distance learning, to a different extent maybe, but that is survey after survey, report after report, and conversation after conversation shows mostly all customers and agencies are going to keep remote work in place to some degree, which is larger than it was before. Now, certain organizations and missions can't be done when remotely, we know that. But again, going back to previously held assumptions and barriers, we've seen that people have realized that a lot of those barriers were false. A lot of those assumptions were false. And we can actually do a lot more remotely than we thought before. So increased or continued remote work and distance learning, that's one. Another one that's going to be enduring is just a different workplace transformation, let's call it. It's kind of a take on remote work, but how people engage in the workplace, how important it is to maintain social interaction even when you have to be remote. I think some of those things we all took for granted before if we were going into the office every day, how important those personal interactions are. So we're going to see that continue, just a different way of how Americans go to work, what we think about when we say going to work. And the third one is, like Frank pointed out, just a continued accelerated digital transformation, not just in the IT shop, not just from the CIO, but across all the business functions and mission areas. In fact, one relationship that we're seeing kind of become more front and center and more important than we've talked about in the past is the relationship between the CIO or the CTO, the technical people, and the HR folks, the CHRO. Because as we talk about what's good for people, what's healthy for people, well, that can often be an HR function. And I would say historically, those two C-level leaders and their teams haven't really engaged that much, and now they are. And it's fantastic because that will truly drive a new way of looking at digital transformation across the entire organization to the human level, to the personal individual level.
All right, we got less than 1 minute left. So I'm going to ask you both to be very concise here. What's the one piece of advice? I'm going to ask for one, Frank. One piece of advice that you'd give to agencies as they kind of move out, as they get closer to reopening, as they get closer back to normal operations.
Yeah, thanks. I was speaking with one federal CIO recently who said that if you haven't reworked or reprioritized your cloud migration strategy, you're going to fail.
And Juliana?
Listen to your chief data officer. Everything we've talked about today, problems and solutions, are about data, and they can help you.
Excellent. This was a fascinating conversation. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. So let me thank my guests. Frank Demina is the Vice President for Public Sector at Splunk, and Juliana Vita is the Chief Technical Advisor for Public Sector also at Splunk. Frank, Juliana, thank you so much for your time. I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion Good to Great, Lessons for Agencies as They Reopen, sponsored by Splunk on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Splunk.